Welcome to the Non-Static Podcast, where we explore how to keep moving forward when motivation feels distant. Here we dive into finding peace and fulfillment in a busy world, discovering how to embrace life's opportunities to live with purpose and joy. I'm John Belke. This is Josh Belke, Dr. Josh. We're brothers. We're co-owners of a mental health company located in the
South Central Minnesota.
South Central Minnesota. Thank you. There you go.
Yep.
And we've been business partners for officially owning our mental health practice for, going on close to 5 years now.
Yeah. 2019.
And we've been in the mental health industry for, probably at least, my entire adult life and most of your adult life as well. So we have a quite a bit of passion for helping people who are struggling with mental health or substance use. And one of the things that you decided to do to reach more people and to kind of help people make more sense of their life, you launched Non-Static. Non-Static is a program that you started that is, why don't you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's just a program I started more or less to send a newsletter out into the world to kind of start conversations about how do we live a life that allows us to focus, free of anxiety, and live a life that helps us to mainly feel fulfilled in whatever it is that we're doing. You know, we're all in different places in life at different times, but regardless of the season that we're in, it's my belief that we can find fulfillment and peace, and that's really what Non-Static is about. It's not really about me telling people what to do. It's more about me journaling as I go along in the journey of life and what works for me. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for everybody, but it's just kind of some tidbits that I like to share about some things that I find relevant.
And you like to write too, so that there's that. I like the idea of writing, but it doesn't necessarily work out as well as I like to. I always try to journal and write down my thoughts and write down my worries and things that are on my mind. But sometimes I guess it's probably just a priority thing. I don't necessarily prioritize my personal journaling as much as I'd like to, but when I do that, it works out really nice.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. One of the things that you were talking about, or that you most recently talked about in your newsletter, was becoming an inventory specialist. The last newsletter, or last episode was about wet cement. That was a really good episode, and a really good newsletter. Do you want to talk a little bit about what being an inventory specialist is? Like, what does that, I mean, it sounds intriguing. I think I kind of know a little bit what's going on with it, but what's going through your mind about that?
Yeah, so it's kind of, an inventory specialist is, let me put it this way. When I was younger, I worked at a grocery store, the local IGA. And it was a humble beginning, but what's cool about it is I got to kind of see how to run a business, and then I got to learn some good work ethic, facing the shelves and stocking and so forth. But one of the things they would do is have inventory specialists come in, and I think it was every 6 months to a year they would come in and they would contract with a company to run inventory, as they would say. And all it really was is everybody went in and made an account of what was physically in the store. So they would run down the aisles with their little adding machines and tally up every single nook and cranny of items in the store, and they would have an account for it. And what that did is it allowed the manager and the store owner to know what was in the store at that particular point in time, and it gave them the ability, with that perspective, to know what they needed to focus on as far as where their inventory is at. It allowed them to focus on different projects related to that inventory, but the whole goal of it was to get perspective, to enable them to make better decisions. And so when I talk about you or I or us being an inventory specialist, I'm really just talking about being an inventory specialist of our own brain.
Okay.
You know, our brains are really good at generating ideas, but they're not very good at processing them and organizing them very well. And a lot of times, the brain's inability to effectively process information kind of contributes to our anxiety and our stress levels. So the idea of inventorying is really the idea of getting things out of our head and organizing them somehow in a reasonable way that allows us to do something with them. So that's really what we're talking about with an inventory specialist.
Why do you suppose that our brains are, I mean, we're so good at coming up with ideas and memories and worries and stresses. Why are we so good at making these memories, but why is our brain so poor at organizing? Is it just the way our brains are made, or is it how we
Well, it's
how
kind of
we
like
use
our
brain.
brains. Our brains are kind of like a computer. So if you think of your laptop or your phone or tablet, whatever computing device you use, or even these tablets that we have in front of us right now, they're good at storing information, but they don't automatically organize it necessarily. It takes some work to organize it. Natively, they don't organize things very well. So if you have a computer and you just start downloading documents and videos and pictures on it, they'll all get dumped in that downloads folder, and they'll all, or some other designated folder, and they'll just kind of all sit there, and you kind of have to do some manual organization. Some computer programs try to organize it for you, but it never does it perfectly, right?
Right.
But if we don't take the time to organize them, it just all gets cluttered up. And our brains are the same way. They're good at developing information. They're good at creating memories. They're good at bringing in information from our environment. But sometimes they're not so good at organizing and making sense of it. A lot of ways. We talk a lot about on here about how our emotions can drive a lot of things and can kind of overtake things. And with our thoughts swirling around in our head and the ideas that our brain generates, we have to be able to do something with those. Otherwise, our brain isn't free to really focus on and do what it does best.
So what do we do to help organize our thoughts?
Well, it's not rocket scientist.
How do we become an inventory specialist?
Well, it's not rocket science. It's really just writing it down. We've all heard that, journal your thoughts or write down ideas, but really,
so I was just talking
it's really not rocket scientist at all. It's really just taking the time to get things out of your head. I call it like a funnel. There's a funnel that goes from your brain, travels down your brainstem, down through your arm, into a pen and onto a piece of paper. And what that does is it forces you and it forces your mind to reckon with what it's producing, and it gives you a different perspective of the information that's in your brain when it's actually written down in front of you.
How does it give you a different perspective on that? Because I mean, it's the same thought. I mean, if you think like, oh, I'm really stressed out about a TPS report I have to do. that was a nod to Office Space. Really good movie.
Yeah.
But if you're like, I gotta have, my boss tells me I got to have something done within a certain period of time, and I'm getting all anxious about it.
In that particular, so let me interrupt, but like in that particular situation, let's just take that. That's one example. Your boss gives you something to do, and there's a due date on it. Your brain is clinging on to that because it knows it can't forget it, and so you need to give your brain the tools that it needs to be able to release that. And if you just say, "Oh, I'll remember it later," without writing it down or without putting it somewhere physical, your brain is going to be tasked with having to remember it. So it's just going to sit up there in your conscious thought.
So using extra energy or extra resources to try to remember that. Okay.
In a very simple way, a task that you have to do. Everybody knows, well, if you have stuff to do, write down, do a to-do list and cross it off, right? Yeah. But a task or something we have to physically do, whether it's vacuum the house or go grocery shopping or pick up a battery at the hardware store, that piece of information, it really functions the same way as any other memory or idea that we have. And that is when you get it out of your head and down onto paper, it gives you a different perspective because your brain can then release it because you can then
have a little bit more
deal
with
it. Yeah, you can deal with it in a physical space rather than bouncing around.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you into that. But that was something I wanted to touch base on. Does it kind of work the same way with like emotions?
Emotions are generated by our brain and by our minds. Yeah. I guess emotions are a response to thoughts or situations. They don't, like an emotion itself isn't a memory, but it gives emphasis to memory. So you have people call them flashbulb memories. Yeah. Usually those are memories that there's really intense emotion one way or another ascribed to it. And the emotion surrounding a certain event or situation or idea or circumstance doesn't make the circumstance any different, but it just embeds it in our memory to a much greater degree.
I see. Okay. Very interesting.
And causes a bigger reaction to it. Yep.
So one thing that you you already talked about this a little bit more, like taking inventory of our minds puts us at ease and allows us to focus on what's really important. So if I have a list of 10 things that I'm thinking about, I always go to a list, but let's just say you have I got some stuff I got to do at work, I got some stuff I got to do at home, and then I'm distracted with some emotional stuff. Maybe family or relational stuff or health-wise. How does your inventory analogy work for dealing with that when you're dealing with a whole bunch of different stuff?
So to kind of answer your question, you kind of talked about the emotional content piece. There's some people refer to it as thought stacking. What I mean by that is when we're thinking down a certain way, so let's say we're upset about something. We had an argument with our friend or our spouse or kids even. If we dwell on that and allow that to sit in our brains, what we've all noticed is that those more negative thoughts or our emotional thoughts tend to attract more emotional thoughts in kind. So if we're in a negative mood and we allow that negativity or those negative thoughts to sit in our mind and continuously ruminate on them over and over and over, those thoughts lead into other negative thoughts, and it kind of taints our viewpoint of things.
Does it seems like negative thoughts seem to always, it's so much easier to nurture, I say in parenthesis, or quotations, negative emotions or whatever, like fear or anxiety, that seems to be so much easier to nurture those and help, and for lack of better terms, help them grow, as opposed to like, I may be feeling down today, but I'm going to choose to look at the glass half full instead of half empty. It's so much more work to stay positive.
True. Well, a couple things to that. One is our minds are always looking for they're always looking for risks that are in our environment, because our brain's first and foremost tendency is to keep yourself safe. So it's always going to be scanning and identifying risks or things that are wrong in the environment, because that could cause things to go wrong in your own life, and it wants to be aware of that. But the other part of it is this idea of your thoughts stacking on top of each other. So if you think of like negative emotions, and happy emotions are the same way, but if you think of emotions as a foundation for your thoughts, thoughts that are similar are going to stack on top of it if we're not careful. And that's sometimes what can contribute to things like depression or anxiety or chronic feelings of sadness, is we allow our minds to continuously dwell on the negative thoughts or our negative emotions tied to those thoughts, and we just kind of collect thoughts or ideas from our environment that feed our assumptions, in that case, of being negative or of being big barriers that we have to overcome.
Sure.
And so we have to be very careful that we don't allow that to happen. And the best way to do that is just to get your thoughts out and then just objectively analyze them, but just getting them out of your head. We talk a common term that most of us use is we get inside of our heads too much. And that's really what's going on, is we're ruminating on these thoughts over and over and over, but we don't do anything with them. And so our brain is going to continuously tell us, hey, you got to do something with this. You got to do something with this. And until we actually do, those thoughts are going to continue to stress us out.
Right. I will say, even every day before work or the night before, the morning of, I always write down, at least for work, I write down my list of things to do for the day, and then and I guess for some reason, even though it's not necessarily dealing with like life stuff in general, it's just work focused, I'm so much more productive. I just feel like I'm in control when I write down things. So I can see how doing that with what's in your head, taking inventory of what's in your head, what's going on in your mind, can help, in general, can help in many other areas aside from just work.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. What are your processes for doing inventory?
Well, what I do isn't really anything too earth-shattering. So if individuals are looking for this miraculous process, there's really nothing miraculous about it. But obviously, the first thing is write it down. I'm an archiver, believe it or not, and so I love writing things down in notebooks, and I love keeping kind of my memories alive that way. But I have a notebook that I carry around with me pretty much wherever I go. It's kind of like one of my appendages. It's always there with me. My wife.
Your journal, or?
But it's a journal. Yep, it's just a journal. Like a Moleskine notebook, and I just jot, if I have thoughts in my head that are bouncing around that won't really go anywhere, I jot them down. But sometimes I just need to do a brain dump, and that's where I write down everything that's on my mind in the moment, as ridiculous as it is, as small as it is, or as significant as it is. I just try to all get it out on paper without really paying attention to how important each of my individual thoughts are. Some thoughts are really important, like I need to pay my mortgage today, otherwise it's going to be late.
Right.
or I've got to buy flowers for my wife's anniversary.
Look at that.
I write those thoughts down, but the same way I do other thoughts of like, oh, I got to get batteries at the hardware store later, or
As long as you get it down.
yeah, just get it out of there without paying attention to how significant they are. That's the first thing I do. Just to get things out of my head is the most important piece, because otherwise, if they stay in our head, we don't write them down, then our brain feels like it has to hold on to them and do something with them.
I've noticed myself that if I don't know if it's just me getting older. I mean, I'm not that old. I'm 39 years old.
Yeah.
But if I got to remember, like, oh, I got to remember that I got to do something or pick something up later. If I don't immediately write it down, it's just gone. So
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I just have too much on my mind, where my brain just doesn't have the capacity to remember more recent events or more recent tasks that I got to do. But I have to write things down immediately. Otherwise it's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll eventually pick it up, but it takes for me. It just takes too much work to try to remember stuff. So
The individual who created I think some of us may have heard of the getting things done methodology.
yes, GTD.
Yeah, I forget the guy's name for whatever reason right now, but he said that our brains really aren't that sophisticated. If they were really sophisticated, what they would do is they would know, to use the battery example, they would know that I needed to buy batteries, but my brain would not prompt me to remember that until I was in the store next to the batteries. But that's never what happens. We always remember we need to buy batteries when we're shaving in the morning before work, or at really random times where it's just simply not helpful. So the whole goal with keeping inventory of our thoughts is to get them out on paper so we can objectively analyze them and figure out what to do with them.
Right.
Once I get everything out of my head, I just take a moment or two to kind of review it all and see what I have in front of me. Are things tasks that I have to do? If so, I inventory them into my task manager or to the famous to-do list. But I just kind of take a minute to think, what's going on in my head? Or is it things that I have to do? Or is it some thoughts I'm having about a challenging situation? Or is it stuff that's more about self-doubt or, problematic areas in my life? I just kind of, and I don't judge the thoughts. I just take a moment to kind of realize, well, what's been going on in my head? And I try not to be too judgmental of what is.
What do you mean? What do you mean by judging your own thoughts?
Well, we get the whole goal of getting everything out. If we're judging our thoughts, sometimes if we think a thought is wrong or bad or not healthy, we're going to be hesitant to write it down. The whole goal of this exercise is to empty your brain of what's stressing it out, rather than ascribing something to the thought. So rather than judging a thought, just get it out and then identify, what is this? Is it something I have to accomplish? Is it an anxiety that I have about something? Is it a thought about myself that just randomly entered into my head?
Right.
So it's really not ascribing judgment. It's just kind of getting them out and then kind of categorizing them to some extent.
Right.
Yep. Typically, when we have thoughts, and this is just my own perspective, I have no scientific backing for this, but it's what I've noticed about myself, is my thoughts tend to fall into two broad categories. Tasks or things that I have to do, and then ideas. Obviously, two very broad categories.
Right.
A task can be, I need to get to the gym today because I didn't go yesterday. But a task can also be, I need to propose to my girlfriend. Or I need to take my spouse out for their anniversary dinner. Those are tasks, and I know that's kind of oversimplifying it,
but
it's an actionable item, something that we're going to be doing.
Sure.
The other piece is the ideas, and ideas can have a whole complex set of issues. An idea can be a book I want to write. An idea can be a new workout plan I'm going to do. An idea can be, maybe I should send some flowers to someone who is sick. Just those are kind of the ideas that bounce around, or they can be emotions that we have or negative thoughts we have. But I try to kind of categorize them. And if they fall into kind of the actionable items type of thing, then I'll kind of make sure I inventory them somehow into my task list or to-do organizer. So that's the next piece, once I figure out what's in there. Then the last one is, which is really helpful for me, and again, this is just what's been helpful for me in my life, I take time, things that aren't really task-oriented, I kind of analyze them. We're kind of getting into a little bit of therapy here with this part of it, but it really is when you analyze the ideas that you have. So let's say you inventory your thoughts and you took care of all your tasks that were nagging you. Now you have all these ideas. Some negative ideas I'm never going to achieve success in life, or I'm never going to get in the physical shape that I want to get in, or I'll never be able to read as many books as I want to, or I'll never be able to participate in the hobbies that I want. Those are all obviously all negative things. But the key with this is to reckon with those thoughts, and is that thought really true, or is it not?
Yeah.
And it's at that point that's where the real work comes in this kind of framework, is to take the time to, one, identify if a thought is true or if it has any merit in your life. And then two, if it's not true, you have to do the work of rejecting it. For me, I'm a visual person that likes to have things archived in paper. So if a thought is true or something I want to hold on to that benefits me in my life, then I'll circle it or highlight it in my notebook. So
Sure.
My notebook is full of colors and different highlights and whatnot. But if there's a negative thought or something that's unhelpful, something that gives me anxiety, and simply not true, those are the thoughts that I really wrestle with. And after I've done that, I take the time of just simply crossing them out. Now, I know I'm oversimplifying it, but it's just kind of my way of categorizing things and kind of dealing with my thoughts and ideas in a physical space.
Well, I suppose, just crossing something off, even just a single line, you could scribble it out, or just a single line through. I suppose just that action is, you're putting a physical action to that thought, that's the untrue thought, and maybe it can help. Does it help you resolve that?
It doesn't really help you. I would say it doesn't help you resolve it. What it does is it puts your thoughts in a space that you can come back to later.
Okay.
And that's where this whole goal of it, the idea of thought inventorying is not to solve all your problems. It's not a miracle cure for for depression, or it's not a cure for relationship issues or motivation issues or whatever. But what it does, it gets everything out of your brain, gets it onto paper. It allows you to analyze it to an extent. Then it lets you put it aside. And then it allows you to be more present in the moment, to be able to focus on what it is that you want to focus on that particular moment.
Sure.
Knowing that, hey, I did have these thoughts. I haven't really resolved them, but I've just identified them, and I can come back to them later if I need to.
Do you find that after you write down these negative thoughts, or these things that are stressing you out or causing anxiety, or just things that you're wrestling with, do you find that after you write them down, a lot of times you just don't even think about them again, or they kind of resolve themselves? Because I know that happens with me. Years ago, as you know, I had a very significant issue with anxiety, and really glass half empty. I always felt like when I was going to college, I feel like if I didn't get 100% on every exam or every assignment, I was a failure.
Yeah.
I felt like if I didn't get 4.0, someone else was better than me, and I couldn't handle that. And so my negative thought process was just kept on, pushing me down, and down. And then I finally had I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I had a worry journal.
Sure.
Anytime I had a negative thought, I would write it down, and then I would write down the negative thought, exactly how I was thinking it, and then I would write down a retort to that. Like, let's say I'm nervous to give a speech in one of my classes. I could write it down and say, well, what's the absolute worst thing that could happen? And then I'll just have a conversation with myself on that negative thought. Sometimes it took a lot of time, but it really helped me. I would never stop writing in this journal. This might not be the right way for most people. It just worked for me. I wrote down the negative thought, and then I would just have a conversation with myself on paper until I actually resolved it in my mind. So I was like, you know what? Okay, we went over all the worst case scenarios. What's likely going to happen with it if I forget everything?
Yeah.
I can just make light of it and say, well, that's all I got. Or, I was just able to resolve it. I felt like just getting it down on paper just allowed me to process it better. And so something that seemed like a big deal really maybe wasn't.
Yeah. The thing we forget, and that process is helpful, albeit rather time consuming. But the whole goal of that is to identify, is a thought logical or not? And just because we have a thought doesn't mean we have to, one, believe it, and also just because we have a thought does not make it true. Right. I think we all have identified people that have had thoughts and ideas that were simply false and not true.
Right.
I don't even want to get into the fact that this is around election time, but you know what I mean? People put ideas out there all the time
Right.
that simply aren't true. So just because we have a thought does not mean we have to believe it. Just because we've generated a
Right.
thought in our head
That's a good
does
point.
not automatically make it true. And I think that's the trap that I know I have fallen into, and I think a lot of us fall into, is because we have a thought, therefore it's true. And a lot of times we don't take the time to really challenge our thoughts to say, really,
Right.
Josh, is this really true? Is this really true? Really?
That's a good way to put it,
You know.
because I guess in many ways I was challenging all my negative
Right.
thoughts, and eventually I just didn't have to do it anymore. Do I still get anxious? Do I still get stressed out? Of course. Do I still get worried or fearful about things? Of course. But it's a lot easier for me to more automatic. It's still automatic. I still have to be intentional about it, but I'm able to process them better in my mind without having to write 2 or 3 pages of a conversation
Right.
with myself.
It's because it's a habit that you've had practice with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so it really works for me. It might work for you guys. May not. You guys might just say, "Oh my gosh, I'll be going through a notebook a day."
That's okay.
But that's what it takes to help you get in more control over your inventory.
Yeah.
The rotten apples.
Get the rotten apples out of your brain.
Yeah, get them out of your brain, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
The thing I would end as we're kind of wrapping up is I would just say that our brains are really good at generating ideas, but they're not very good at processing them. And what I mean by that is they're not very good at analyzing, is it true or not. It just kind of, our brains will generate things and run with them. And unfortunately, it's kind of our responsibility to really make that determination. Does a thought hold any value?
Right.
That's really the key to all this. That's my goal, at least.
Yeah. One kind of way, just kind of like major side note is, each of our brains behave differently. Each of us we all process things differently. You are much more, it seems like you're a lot more organized in your thinking. At least you give off the impression that you are.
Sure.
And I'm just kind of more like just kind of thinking about a lot of stuff all the time. That also kind of reminds me, like, we've taken some personality tests, and it always fascinates me that we all have, we're all different, we're all unique, but I always kind of wondered, like, what makes our personalities different? Like, I'm not an inventor. I would love to have the mindset of, like, I just want to create something, like, just have a sense of wonder, and then just invent something and run with it, and that kind of thing. I'm just not very good at. I'm very good at fleshing out ideas that are given to me, but I'm not really like a creator or that kind of thing. Why do you think that is? Is it just a personality thing, or just like the way we're
well, it's a whole.
And that's a totally different topic.
A whole topic, a different conversation. But really, what we're getting down to is we all have our own unique genetic makeup, and we all have our own natural tendencies towards whether it's creativity or being more logical. We all have our own slant to it. But then we also remember we are also all products of our environment.
Yeah.
And so it's a combination of both those genetic factors, genetic predispositions that we have towards things, and what environment did we have that has impacted those. So, we talked about wet cement in the past. All of our unique experiences that we've had in life contribute to our personalities and eventually build to become the person that we are today. Our brains are plastic, and what I mean by that is they're constantly changing and evolving over time, because our brain is like it's a computer that learns based off the inputs that are put into it. So every circumstance, every encounter you have, every lesson learned in life, so to speak, contributes to who you are at this very moment. And it's actually kind of fascinating. It's a rabbit hole that I go down quite a bit. It's kind of like the butterfly effect. So if I had made one different decision, back when I was in high school,
right,
how would that be different to today? It's just interesting to think about, not to go back and regret anything I've done, but it's just kind of interesting to think about.
It really does. Yeah, it really does change. Yeah, when you think about it like that, when you think about, I call it the thin thread. Yeah. That like it really is like the very fact that we're doing this right now, whereas just like 5 years ago we weren't business owners. We didn't have a mental health we didn't have mental health. I wasn't even planning on getting into mental health, into this industry. I went to school for business management, and it just ended up. I mean, if we hadn't grown up together, if we hadn't had kind of pretty much all our adult life having experience in the mental health field, I wouldn't. I probably wouldn't be in this industry. I would. I don't know what I would be doing, but it is a really cool thin thread on how we get to where we're at.
Yeah.
What's something that you're listening to right now? I always like to talk about what you're listening to, what you're reading.
So first of all, I try to stay out of opinions about politics and whatever else. I try to not touch that. And so, but there was a podcast that I listened to where the host, his name is Ed Milet. He's in the, I think, personal development coaching space. Anyway, pretty successful guy. But that's not why I recommend this podcast. He interviewed someone, and it's resonated with me. I've actually thought about this interview every day since I've listened to it about 2 weeks ago. But he interviewed this, at the time of the interview, the kid was 19 years old, and he had started a hot sauce company after he took a business class in high school, and the high school business teacher told him that his idea wouldn't work. And so this kid, and I don't want to give away the podcast because it really is stuck with me, but this kid had a lot of other huge barriers to overcome in his life to even think about starting a business, let alone one that's successful. But anyway, it just kind of talked about how he went through incredible obstacles between the ages of 17 and 19. He started a company that's now continuing to gain momentum, and it's called Crippling Hot Sauce is the company's name, and it's a phenomenal listen. Again, the point of it isn't to make anyone an Ed Milet fan, but I really would like people to listen to the content of who he's interviewing and within that context. It's fascinating.
Absolutely. I'm assuming he does a lot of interviews like that. Or not?
He does a lot of interviewing, but that was the one that really stuck out to me. That particularly stuck out to me.
I'll definitely have to check that one out for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have did we go through this right? Do you have a final takeaway?
Just to remember, our brains are good at generating ideas, but not very good at processing them.
Yeah. It's a muscle. It's plastic. It's muscle. Right. The more you use it, the more you exercise that ability to process things and categorize them and get them out on paper. I think the better off we're all going to be.
Yep.
I know when I'm consistent with that, my days go a heck of a lot better, and my brain is a lot more clear, and I feel more free. Yeah. But the days where I forget to do that or just choose not to, like I don't have time to make inventory of the thoughts in my mind, days definitely do not go as well.
Those are probably the days that you need to prioritize it more than others.
Oh, I know. Yeah. I need to force myself to slow down to do this stuff. So, all right. Well, I think that's it that we got for today. Yep. Wish you guys all the very best. If you guys like this, please share it with other people. We're new at this. As we just have a few podcasts out right now, but please go ahead and subscribe and share this with other people who you feel might benefit from it. And until the next time, I hope you guys have a great day.
Enjoy the journey, everyone.